Number 5. The Dover Demon. Starting off on our list is the cutest cryptid on this list in my opinion, but still a creepy little freak. I like to start with the cute ones to kind of ease you into it. The Dover Demon first appeared in Massachusetts in the town of Dover, lending it its name. It appears as a spindly little demon kind of looking thing that sort of resembles a little gray, the traditional big-eyed aliens that you see everywhere. The Dover Demon is identified by its blank face, its red glowing eyes, and its hunched quadruped stature. The Dover Demon was first recorded in the late 1970s, discovered by 3 teenagers who were driving through Mass when they saw something bizarre being lit up by their headlights. Initially, they didn't think too much of it until they noticed that the creature in front of them looked more like a human than it did an animal. The driver, one Bill Bartlett, described the creature as resembling a baby with elongated arms, tan, sandpaper-like skin, which was coarse looking, and no nose, ears, or mouth to speak of on its bulbous, enlarged head. Bartlett claims that he only got a good look at it for a few seconds before it vanished off into the night. Now, there are some who speculate that the Dover Demon is capable of rendering itself invisible or camouflaging itself because of the description of this story, and that during daylight it prefers to hide itself in the trees of Dover. Now, bizarrely, I think some skeptics write off the Dover Demon by claiming it was just a baby moose being seen at an odd angle or under strange conditions. And I don't know if I really buy that. I've never seen a baby moose at night in headlights, but I have seen a baby moose. They would have a bulbous head or front-facing eyes, and a baby moose doesn't have that, so I don't know if it's all that. A more pressing question, I think, is if the Dover Demon is a cryptid or perhaps a visitor from another planet, because it does look a lot like the descriptions of the little grays. Now, there's a bigger philosophical question there. Are aliens cryptid? Let me know about that in the comments below. And if you like hearing stories about cryptids and aliens, well, I have some great news, my friend. We got loads of cryptid videos on the channel, so get comfy, click through the playlists, and stay subscribed for something new every day. Number 4. Goatman. Up next on our list of cryptids that'll keep you from sleeping is Maryland's own Goatman. Now, he might look like Mr. Tumnus, but he isn't going to take you to Narnia anytime soon, and there'll be no Turkish delight in your future. Appearing as a half-human, satiric hybrid, the Goatman is thought to roam around Maryland, but he's been sighted in Louisiana and Texas as well. You know, perhaps he gets bored, perhaps he was taking a tour. The Goatman is said to carry a hatchet with him, and not for hacking any lumber. He's been said to be responsible for missing animals around the wooded areas in Maryland. Now, there's a pretty good historical precedent for goats involved in mythology, with satyrs as a mythical historical cryptid, and goats have been associated with Satan and demons for generations. But the Goatman himself has got a pretty rich history in Maryland folklore. Depending on who you ask, he's either just a cryptid goat man who wanders the woods, or if that's not satisfying enough for you, one particularly colorful origin for the goat man is that it's the product of a mad scientist's experiment who was experimenting with goats, and when it went astray, the goat man broke loose and started attacking passersby with an axe. I really like this one, and I choose to believe it's 100% factual. The goat man is a pretty popular folk story with teenagers, with urban legends describing the beast hunting down those who are looking to spend a little quality time at Lover's Lane. It said he'll come and bleat ya. Bleat, like beat. It's a goat pun. It was pretty bad. Do goats do that, or is this sheep? I'm not sure. You know what? I shouldn't be practicing here. We're gonna move on from this. The Goatman still hasn't been seen as much in recent years, and I sincerely hope that he's still out there.
Number 3. Mothman. The next cryptid is said to have spent his time around West Virginia in the mid to late 60s, scaring locals and possibly even predicting local tragedies before they happened. In November of 1966, 2 grave diggers were practicing their trade in a cemetery in Clendenin, West Virginia. It was a dark and stormy night, but these men had worked in a graveyard for many years and were not easily spooked, or so they thought. When they looked up into one of the trees, they saw a strange man-like figure perched in its branches, watching them. He had glowing red eyes and gigantic 10-foot wings, and even after the initial shock wore off of the gravediggers, they reported feeling an intense sense of dread and foreboding due to his presence. A few days later, 2 young couples were making a day trip in their car near Point Pleasant. While they were driving near a former military munitions site, a figure matching the description given by the gravediggers swooped down from the sky and started to chase the vehicle. As sightings of the creature continued to come in over the next year, later, the creature was dubbed the Mothman by the local papers. Some of the locals believed that the Mothman was living in a vacant nuclear power plant outside of Point Pleasant, and was possibly the escaped product of some kind of accident or secret government experiment. The dread-inducing encounters and sightings suddenly came to a stop in December 1967 when the Silver Bridge, which carried US Route 35 over the Ohio River, suddenly collapsed due to a faulty suspension wire and the weight of rush hour traffic. 46 people lost their lives in the tragic accident, and the Mothman suddenly disappeared. This led to theories that the Mothman showed up before disasters as a horrifying omen of approaching doom, with similar creatures being reported in other places before disasters, such as in Chernobyl prior to the famous disaster there. Is this creature really an omen of approaching doom? Or is there some other explanation for this terrifying and dreadful apparition that terrorized the inhabitants of the Point Pleasant area in West Virginia?
There is said to be a strange creature stalking the swamplands of Lee County, South Carolina, that being a big 7-foot-tall lizard man. On the 14th of July 1988, sheriffs of Lee County were called to inspect damage done to a vehicle parked outside a home right next to the scape or swamp. The vehicle had large tooth marks and scratches on it. Once the story hit the news, a teenage boy by the name of Christopher Davis came out to make his own report to the police, saying that just 2 weeks prior, his car had been damaged, only he had actually seen the person, or rather the thing, that was responsible. Yes, it was our titular lizard man. Christopher described the creature to be a massive, 7-foot-tall creature with 3 fingers per hand, red eyes, and green, wet, scaly skin. He had been driving home from work one night when he got a flat tire. When he got out of his car to fix it, he saw the creature making his way towards him. Abruptly got in his car and started driving off, but the creature was so fast that it caught up to him, driving at 64 kilometers an hour. That's about 40 miles per hour for the Americans in the audience. And Lizard Man is now on the roof of his car, scratching at it. Christopher quickly hit the brakes, causing the monster to fly off his vehicle before finally making his escape. When news of this report hit the papers, it caused a frenzy. Lizard Man was the talk of the town. More and more reports started coming in. The local radio station offered a $1 million reward to whoever could catch the beast, so hunters started flocking to town to try and catch it. Stores in the area began selling Lizard Man t-shirts. It was Lizard Mania! And local sheriffs began writing off the supposed encounters as bear sightings, because if there are two things that look eerily similar, it's definitely a furry bear and a big green scaly lizard monster with red eyes and no hair to speak of. A bear? That's the best they could come up with? I'm not buying it.
Number 1. The North American house hippo. Our next cryptid is one that every school child in Canada has heard of, and has spent many a sleepless night worrying that they will cross paths with. These strange and frightening creatures bring an aura of terror that cannot ever be truly understood by people in a foreign country. However, I will try to help you understand what it is we are dealing with. Imagine, if you will, it's nighttime, in a kitchen just like yours. All is quiet. Or is it? The North American house hippo is found throughout Canada and the eastern United States. House hippos are very timid creatures and are rarely seen, but they will defend their territory if provoked. They come out at night to search for food, water, and materials for their nests. The favorite foods of the house hippo are chips, raisins, and crumbs from peanut butter on toast. They build their nests in bedroom closets, using lost mittens, dryer lint, and bits of string. The nests have to be very soft and warm. House hippos sleep for about 16 hours a day. House hippos are extremely hard to spot. They enjoy admiring their reflections, hoarding socks, helping themselves to your devices, and annoying your pets. They're small creatures, only about the size of a hamster, and chances are most Canadians have one living in their household and don't even know it. House hippos are extremely intelligent, which is why they are rarely, if ever, found caught in mouse traps or other devices meant to capture typical household vermin. The house hippo is so rarely seen that many people believe that the creature is simply an elaborate hoax. But the rare person to encounter these creatures will never forget the sounds they make before charging and attempting to bite off one of your toes. Just how many house hippos are out there, and where did they come from? We may never know for certain.
Number 5. the Loveland frog. First up on our list is the Loveland frog, a cryptid that was new to me but is very quickly winning my heart, and maybe he'll steal yours as well. The Loveland frogman is a mythic humanoid frog that is a legend to the people of Loveland, Ohio, which is where the name comes from. The frogman is described as a 4-foot bipedal frog, mostly appearing to hide around bodies of water. I mean, it's a frog. Where else is it gonna go? It was first sighted in 1955 by a businessman driving home alone at night. He was headed out towards Branch Hill in Ohio when he saw 3 strange, short, squat, bizarre-looking creatures standing on their hind legs alongside the road. He described them all as being 3 to 4 feet tall with leathery-looking skin and faces just like a frog with giant glowing yellow eyes. The frogman would go quiet for a bit and wouldn't be seen again until 1972 when a local police officer was driving home and saw an unidentified 4-foot creature running in front of his car's headlights. When he got a good look at it, the officer described it as a leather-skinned bipedal animal crouching like a frog, and it hurriedly ran towards a river. 2 weeks after that sighting, another Loveland police officer reported seeing the same creature, the same little bipedal frog monster. This officer, however, shot at the frogman and discovered that what he found was a tailless iguana that had grown unusually large. Now, while for some, that was the end of the frogman legend, there are still sightings and reports to this day. As recent as 2016, people are still claiming that they see the Loveland frogman. To the people of Loveland, the frogman is something of a local hero. They love the guy, and I gotta be honest, I sincerely do too. There's something about this cryptid story that's really doing it for me. There's no stories about him eating anybody, the Loveland frog monster's not attacking anybody, he's just a happy little frog guy scurrying across the roads. I sincerely hope they're out there. And hey, you having fun on the channel? Drop a subscribe for new scary videos every single day, twice a day. Let's keep on going. Number 4. The Fresno Nightcrawlers. Up next is the Fresno Nightcrawlers, and let me just say right now, these are probably my favorite cryptid on the entire list. If I say another one is, I'm lying. It's these guys. Some cryptids are downright terrifying. Some cryptids will keep you up all night, and maybe these guys will too, but I personally find them downright adorable. These are the Fresno Nightcrawlers, bizarre, rail-thin bipedal creatures with no discernible features whatsoever. The only footage we have of them is blurry security camera footage, which doesn't help identify the creatures much at all. They appear short with very, very long legs, almost stilt-like. The first reported sighting of one of the Nightcrawlers came from a city in California, Fresno, where the name comes from. A man named Jose was at home late at night with his dog trying to get a good night's sleep, but was repeatedly disturbed by his dog barking at something out the window. He went over to quiet his dogs down and noticed something deeply bizarre on his security camera. He saw a pair of white, elongated creatures strolling down his lawn. The next morning he claims to have seen small footprints all over the lawn. The next sighting of the Nightwalkers was in Carmel, also in California. A former Marine and his wife were driving up a hill, and they claimed that they saw a 7-foot tall creature that they described as a thin, pale, armless white humanoid walking on by. What are the Nightwalkers? They're weirding me out. Are they aliens? Cryptid? Possessed pair of pants? If anyone's got a line, you let us know immediately. Whatever the Nightwalkers are, all I know is that I love them. I think they are downright adorable. I watched a clip of them walking down the hill like 30 times while I was writing this script, so just know that. Number 3, Qualpalic. The Qualpalic, or the Qualipiluit, is an indigenous cryptid, with most stories emanating from Nunavut, Canada, and Alaska in the United States. The Qualpalic is described as appearing vaguely humanoid, but having scaly and bumpy skin, and long, stringy, disgusting black hair. They are described as being disgustingly ugly and that they reek of sulfur, and I think it's worth noting that you cannot find a single artist's depiction of these things that don't make them just look like vomitatiously gross. Interestingly, the creature is predominantly described as being a female monster, although some local variations of the stories exist where it is described as a male creature, but most tales revolving it describe it as a lady monster. The Qualpalic is a bit of an icy boogeyman, snatching up children who misbehave, waiting around thin ice to crack up and drag those children down into freezing cold water. It's thought that the origin of this creature was first told as a story for practical purposes, as a pretty good way to get kids to not walk on thin ice is to tell them that they'll be grabbed by a gross ice demon. Allegedly, when they grab a child, they stuff them inside their leather burlap sacks, then scurry back downwards into the water. It's said that you can hear a knocking under the ice as a last warning that they're about to strike. Now maybe this is just a personal experience I had, and maybe some of you also had this as a little kid, but I was read a children's book called A Promise is a Promise, a Robert Munsch classic, that featured a Qualapalak as a villain that was trying to get a little girl to bring her younger siblings to the Qualapalak as a little snack, and it terrified me so much. I didn't even live anywhere near thin ice and I was scared about it. Scared me bad. Wiry black hair and sunken little eyes got me. Maybe it's not relatable at all, but I thought I would share that. I definitely didn't spend any time near thin ice afterwards. Number 2, the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a fairly popular cryptid and has been subject to all sorts of sightings and stories since the early 1700s. And I bet you can't guess where it usually shows up. That's right. California. Nope, New Jersey. The Jersey Devil is commonly described as manifesting itself as a chimeric creature with a horse's head, bat wings, a snake-like tail, and hooves. There's an interesting folktale that says that the Jersey Devil was brought into our world when a woman was stressed out over her 13th pregnancy. Good lord, yeah, I would be too at my 13th pregnancy. Okay. She was nervous because apparently this pregnancy felt different, and I guess if she had 12 others, she'd really know. She said that she felt like the baby that was inside her was the devil. When she was ready to deliver her little newborn, instead of a happy little baby, the Jersey Devil was born, flew out into the night, and then spent the next 250 years terrorizing the New Jersey swampland. The creature is deeply rooted in local folklore, and to be honest, it's kind of beloved around Jersey. It serves as the name for the New Jersey Devils, and it worms its way into all sorts of pop culture, games, movies, TV, music. They love them over there. For years, there have been stories and sightings around New Jersey describing a kangaroo-like creature with glowing red eyes hunting on small animals in the surrounding areas, and lots of blurry photos of bizarre hybrid-looking creatures running around the countryside. There have even been hunts and bounties posted for the Jersey Devil with rewards for its capture. So is the Jersey Devil real, or just a beloved local legend? Number 1, the Hat Man. Rounding off our list is our most recent cryptid on this list, and a piece of modern folklore that is already making a lasting legacy. The Hat Man is a shadow person, or at least thought to be. Everyone who's seen the Hat Man has described almost the same thing exactly, most concerningly. A spindly, shadowy figure that appears to be wearing a hat. Sometimes a fedora, sometimes a top hat, but everyone describes him as wearing an old, out-of-date style, so you're not going to see him in a shadowy snapback anytime soon. He always appears fairly towering, and you can't see his face. It's obscured, or just not present, and the only thing you're truly able to make out are his pinprick red eyes poking out of the shadows watching you. Depending on who you ask based on the sightings, the Hat Man can be considered somewhat benign. Maybe. It's usually reported that the Hat Man appears to people who are suffering from sleep paralysis or insomnia, and most claims of Hat Man describe him as just watching, observing, studying, or whatever. I honestly don't know if that's better than it attacking you. However, it's not all just stories of nighttime stalking. There are some who claim that when they've been visited by the Hat Man, that he's jumped them or choked them, or they've felt burning sensations on their scalps or their chest. Although some say he's just watching you for I don't want to know why. There are many who believe that he feeds off your negative emotions, and perhaps this is how he satiates himself. It's said that people who are visited by Hat Man are those who are already struggling with something emotionally resonating. Sometimes people in the same family even report seeing the Hat Man in similar occurrences, so does he target specific groups of people? Or is it just certain emotions he hungers for? The Hat Man is shrouded in mystery, and even just thinking about him is enough to make my hair stand on end and start eyeing the coat rack in my room just a little suspiciously when I turn the lights off.
In 5th place, we have flying monkeys. Yep, you heard me right. Well, The Wizard of Oz might be one of my all-time favorite films. Heck, I've even cosplayed Dorothy alongside my childhood Toto plush. It took me a while to wrap my head around this sighting. Darla of Jacksonville, Florida, experienced this event in May of 2017 that left her completely bewildered. She was driving on a neighborhood street and a strange animal was on the roadway. She could see its head and it looked kind of like a monkey, but it was smaller, similar in size to a prairie dog or a gopher. She found herself repeating, "What on earth is that?" to her friend that was in the car with her as she drove around it, seeing as it wasn't moving and was possibly dazed by the headlights on her vehicle. I'm hoping she didn't have her high beams on because they fry out my eyes, so I don't want to imagine what it would do to a little critter. Her friend thought it was like a possum at first, until they passed it and agreed that it definitely didn't resemble a possum, but they still couldn't come to a consensus on what it was. Darla turned the vehicle around and all she could see were wings that seemed way too large for the size of what she had seen flying away. Now the logical part of her brain took over and deemed whatever the heck it was too big to be an owl, so maybe it was snatched up in the sky by an owl? At this point we've named off every similar creature in the same size range. Darla pulled over to mentally dissect what she had just seen to try and make sense of it. It was a being that was kinda on the smaller size, with a head, a neck, the ability to stand solidly on two legs, oh, and with extremely large wings. I was gonna say, that was almost my description. If anyone has any solid guesses, feel free to let me know in the comments. She knew that the nearby Walmart had monkeys living in the parking lot after independent owners let them escape, leaving her confused for eternity. All that comes to my brain after that description, for me personally, is the damn IKEA monkey, but wearing like a Wizard of Oz evil witch uniform instead of the oversized coat. I'm glad Darla managed to avoid any harm to herself or to her vehicle, but I know I'll be wondering exactly what the heck that creature would be for the rest of the night. Yeah, I got nothing. In fourth place, we had a manananggal from the Philippines. I swear I do look up how to pronounce new words, but my tongue just doesn't like them on occasion, and sometimes I get led astray by false pronunciation videos. Two young women in Talisay City are positive that they spotted this creature. The name comes from the Tagalog word tanggal, which means to remove or to separate. Oh, for those of us who aren't experts on this creature, it's a being whose upper body separates from its lower body, possesses fangs and wings that give them a vampire-like appearance, and resides exclusively in the Philippines. This creature is said to favor preying on sleeping pregnant women, using an elongated proboscis-like tongue to suck the hearts of fetuses or the life source of someone who is sleeping. Now, as usual, local police are trying desperately to cover up this spotting, but thanks to social media, that's getting harder and harder for them to do. And we all know I hate a cover-up. Our two witnesses went to a neighbor's house to get a Wi-Fi connection, and afterwards, while they were returning to their own home, they spotted the manananggal on top of a roof of a neighbor's house. Now, the neighbor in question sadly didn't bear witness to the majestic creature, just both women shouting and crying. Police also interviewed another neighbor, whose house is close to this first neighbor's home, and he claimed to see the same thing. You know, the girls were shouting and crying, but nothing in the sky. Seeing as we have photographic evidence though, I'll let you lovely folks out there in the interwebs form your own opinions down in the comments.
Number 3. Skinwalkers. Now let's shift to one that's not adorable even a little bit. Skinwalkers are an extremely popular cryptid, a person with the ability to shapeshift into any creature they desire. Sometimes the legends state that in order to shapeshift they need to molt out of their skin, and in some legends they have to wear the pelt of the animal they intend to shapeshift into. You know, sometimes skinwalkers are presented as monstrous, sometimes humanoid. The recurring lines through every skinwalker stories though is that they are absolutely terrifying, and under no circumstances should you ever look one in the eyes, as it's said that looking one in the eyes will not only draw its attention, but seal your fate. So take a listen to this story from Reddit. This post came to us from a Reddit thread asking, what was the scariest thing that has ever happened to you? And an anonymous Redditor shared this story, and it's probably one of the scariest things I've ever read. Beginning. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up gathering firewood from my grandmother because it was getting dark. We were driving back on a dirt road, and I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, my uncle shouted, "Don't." My heart felt like it was gonna beat out of my chest, and I heard a tap on the window. My uncle sped up and started praying in our native language. I didn't know what was going on, and I thought it was over until our truck dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me and don't turn away," over and over. And then I heard it again, tapping from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe, and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed, and the truck dipped. My uncle looked at me and said, "We'll ask your father to do a prayer in the morning so that the evil will forget our faces." Naturally, other people on Reddit were kind of terrified about that story since it's sending a chill down my spine, and they asked him what he thought it was, and the Redditor said simply that he thought it was possibly a skinwalker. What more is there to say? Number 2. The Flatwood Monster. The Flatwood Monster is another West Virginia native, and I've gotta ask, why are there so many cryptid stories coming out of West Virginia? I've never been there, so maybe somebody can clear this up, because all I know about West Virginia is anything John Denver sang about, and he didn't mention Mothman or the Flatwood Monster, but that's a whole different story. Anyway, the Flatwood Monster is a cryptid that's been thought to be an extraterrestrial in nature. It was reported to be 10 feet tall and roughly 4 feet wide. It's described as wearing some sort of mechanical suit like it's Darth Vader rather than a purely organical being, and its most notable feature is its giant bulbous head with 2 gigantic eyes glowing green. It's got a big cowl in the shape of a spade behind it that makes it look a bit like it's an alien vampire, and its body was thick, armored, and it has small, spindly little arms like a T-Rex. Now, the Flatwood Monster's first sighting dates all the way back to 1952, when 3 local boys saw a shining light falling across the sky, eventually hitting the ground nearby at a local farm. The boys returned home to report that they'd seen a UFO crash land and told one of their moms to get a search party going, and honestly, that is exactly what I would do if I ever saw an alien. I would probably still call my mom, to be honest, if I ever saw an alien. From there, they gathered a small search party to go to the farm to approach what they saw. saw. When they reached the top of the hill, they saw a large pulsating ball of fire and smelled a mist that was making their eyes burn. Someone in the search party noticed two small lights and flashed his light quickly at them, revealing a creature standing 10 feet tall with glowing green eyes. The creature hissed at them, then glid upwards and head off into the night. What was the Flatwood Monster? Some skeptics have speculated that those eyes could have been that of a barn owl, and the face does kind of light up. The shadow was disguising it, so it would make sense. But that begs to ask, what was the mist? And what was the thing that fell from the sky? Was the Flatwood Monster an alien? And is it just me, or is the Flatwood Monster just the tiniest bit adorable as well? I know it's kind of terrifying, and its bug eyes are gonna haunt my dreams, but does anyone else think it looks a little huggable? Shaped like a friend? Number 1. Mothman. Mothman is arguably one of the most famous cryptids of all time, and it's captured our heart since he started flapping around in popularity. Mothman's first ever recorded sighting was in 1966 in West Virginia, when 5 men were in a cemetery prepping for a funeral when they saw something bizarre rustling around in the trees nearby, and lifting off was a massive brown-winged creature that disappeared into the night, far too large and unwieldy to be a bird. From there, the legend of the Mothman began to rise. It would get spotted frequently throughout West Virginia and the surrounding states, but its home is West Virginia. 3 days later, after the first sighting of the Mothman, on November 5th, 1966, another sighting occurred. Roger and Linda Scarberry were driving with their friends, another couple, Steve and Mary Millette, around midnight. While driving, the couples noticed that amidst the darkness there were glowing eyes that seemed to be hovering around them. They stalled the car a bit, unnerved about who these mysterious eyes could have belonged to, and through the darkness and the headlights of the car, they saw a creature that stood 7 feet tall with leathery wings folded against its back. The creature began to pursue them rapidly, matching the speed of the car at around 100 miles an hour. They tried to turn around to get a better look at the thing, but the creature screeched and flew upwards into the sky when it was hit by its headlights. Now this would be far from the last sighting of the Mothman. Since these early sightings, Mothman has been reported hundreds of times across West Virginia. He's practically a pillar of the community. I think he's allowed to vote. Some say he's a benevolent figure who wants to help people and warn them of dangers around, whereas others say that he's a more mysterious, nefarious agent, flying around sending people to their doom. There's an allegation that Mothman was involved in the destruction of a bridge in 1967 that led to the death of 40 people. Some survivors claim that they saw the Mothman flying around overhead after the collapse. Whether he's real, a West Virginian legend, a friend or a foe, there's no denying that like a moth to a flame, we're drawn to the story of the Mothman.
Number 5. Day trip gone wrong. When in the wilds of Alberta, people are often advised to be aware of the wildlife that might wander into your path and how to deal with it. It is not uncommon for people to see deer, bears, and even the occasional mountain lion. But one creature that they are not warned about in many of the pamphlets is Bigfoot. As this family found out, this is their story as related by their father. There was still some snow in the bush. We were picking dead tamarack and spruce deadfall to take home for making beanpole teepees in our garden. We had our 3 kids with us, aged around 3, 6, and 8 at the time. My wife and I were dragging the dry fall out of the bush and figuring which ones we could work with. After what seemed like a couple hours, we had a stack of about 25 poles, and we were eating lunch with the kids when things went absolutely crazy. At first we got screamed at big time. Then, stuff comes flying out of the bush at us, like rocks, tree limbs, and sod hunks. Sounded like things breaking in the bush and whacking sounds. It was f***ing nuts. Nothing hit any of us. We had been in that area many times prior in the years, and never had anything like this occur. Our 8-year-old jumped into the truck and locked all the doors, with the other 4 of us doing laps around the vehicle. I grabs our 3-year-old and gets her into the back seat through the window, and I'm trying to figure out who is screwing with us. It is funny now, not so much back then. Now this is weird. First, whoever or whatever was crawling on all 4s over all the downed timber and old logs, staring right at me as it moved back and forth. From what I could make out, and another 1 or 2 were behind it, also on all 4s, crawling around behind with the closer one that seemed way bigger, one that I could make out, although the bush. These ones were about 15 to 20 feet inside the tree line. We were parked in the ditch off the old lease road. About 30 to 40 feet further into the timber was another 2, or a couple person's silhouette we could make out. They were moving through the trees, making animal crazy sounds, big deep volume. We were like, holy crap, no person could do that. No way anyone could belt it out like that. Not a chance. This went on for what seemed a good couple minutes. All of the kids began freaking out and crying inside the vehicle. My wife was standing with me when we were watching this go on, and then started telling me, "Let's get out of here." And I am trying to get a grip on the shit I am looking at through inside the trees. I don't think I was freaked out by what was happening. I could just not process what I was looking at. I still recall thinking, why are some people trying to scare the crap out of us out here? Number 4. Wycliffe Regional Park. Despite being posted on the Sasquatch Alberta website, our next tale actually takes place in British Columbia. However, it does feature a man who went out looking for a creature and claims to have come across the legendary cryptid as well as their young. In his own words, this happened near Wycliffe Regional Park, Perry Creek Road, Cranbrook, BC. I was out a few years ago looking for Sasquatches. I made noises to attract any creature and I got several responses. They kept getting closer and closer. Then I heard the footsteps, more vocalizations, closer and closer. Then I saw it. For only a second and a half, a large, upright creature with a smaller child creature brushed past my view and disappeared into the forest. I started chasing it, but could not keep up. Right where I saw it moments before, there were footprints 6 inches into the ground, and hair on trees where they were. I know this sighting is not in Alberta, but pretty close, so I just wanted to let you know about my experience. I did take photos, but they were lost when my old phone broke. I had been there 3 to 5 times before with friends, but we didn't find much evidence until the other time I reported about earlier today. I have not been back there because I am just shocked and kind of terrified of what I saw. I went out there just because I didn't know what was on the dirt road past the Wycliffe Regional Park, and I just wanted to know what I would find back there.
In third place, we have a winged humanoid. I swear the entire list isn't going to be winged beings, I promise. Come on, don't you folks trust me by now? Look at this face. I don't think I've ever led y'all wrong. Chicago-based private investigator Manuel Navarrete was hanging out with his friends in a bakery parking lot on February 5th of this year, just chatting and vibing, as one does, when the group noticed something standing on top of the flea market across the parking lot. It looked like a pitch-black, 7-foot-tall man with wings that were wider than a car and red eyes that were as bright as taillights. The creature was observing Manuel and his buddies closely, making chirping noises that the group could hear clearly from the distance they were at, which was around 50 yards away even without the height difference. Now the group continued their staring contest with the being for almost 10 minutes before it flew straight into the air and over the group of dudes, watching them the entire time. The men fought the temptation to run, not wanting to lead the creature anywhere or trigger like a prey response. They estimate the entire encounter happened between 11 to 11:30 p.m. and it was a rather clear evening, so there was no chance of clouds warping what they saw. I'll leave you folks with something fun to ponder over. This is the 8th confirmed sighting reported in that area since 2017, and no one is positive what the heck this creature is, just that it's out there. In second place, we have a glimmer man in Chicago. See, I told y'all. No more winged whatevers. The only connection this encounter has to the last one is that they were both based out of Chicago, but in different areas of the city and took place within the last year. Other than that, no relation. Stella's experience took place on September 2nd of 2022, after a day of running errands for her elderly father, when she had returned to his apartment building and 6th floor residence. She went out on the balcony for a cigarette break, just standing and allowing her mind to go blank, when she noticed a weird large tree around 20 feet away. Yes, I'll obviously elaborate. One of the branches on the tree was bowing quite heavily, but Stella couldn't see anything on it that could be responsible for weighing it down. So as she was staring at the branch and trying to make sense of what her eyes were seeing, an intense feeling of dread and fear came over her, as if every part of her body was screaming at her to turn around and run, but she didn't know why. At this very moment, the bowing branch that she had just been observing began to shake violently, and despite her internal instincts still screaming at Stella, leave, curiosity had now gotten the better of her, and she started to move along the railing to get a closer look. As your friendly narrator, this is where I interject and tell anyone with some sense to, run! But hey, what do I know? It's not like I talk about this for a living. A small form began to glimmer on the branch, and as Stella continued to watch in shock, a transparent human figure that shimmered a yellowish-whitish color developed. Stella snapped out of her fixated stare and quickly took a step back from the railing, realizing finally that this is something that maybe should be feared. Glad the old common sense kicked in after the overwhelming fear, dread, and visual should have kicked in sooner in my opinion, but that's just my usual snark kicking in. The shimmery being eventually dropped out of the tree, landing behind a man who happened to be walking past at the time. Now the walking man spun around, his reaction similar to as if he had been hit with an object from behind, and was confused when all he saw was a cloud of smoke. Oh, by the way, the shimmery man had disappeared in the puff of smoke almost instantly after hitting the ground. Now Stella waited for some time, expecting to see this thing re-emerge from the dust or smoke, but it was completely gone. At the same time, another neighbor just a few floors below Stella and her dad had also observed exactly the same thing as her and managed to confirm all the same details. Now the neighbor and Stella then managed to track down the man who was walking past a few hours later, and after a conversation, confirmed that he had felt the weird impact, the overwhelming dread, but didn't see anything. Stella is positive that the Glimmerman still roams the area, often feeling the overwhelming emotions from the day whenever she visits her dad, but hasn't spotted it since. My heart goes out to her, and I hope whatever it is buggers off soon for her sake. In our first place, we have an aquatic cryptid in Vancouver. I swear ending today's video on a Canuck tale wasn't planned, but when it works, it works. Taylor Wallace is a private investigator based out of BC who was hired to find evidence of a person that's gone missing without a trace, only to find after a more than 6-year investigation evidence of large clawed creatures that could very well be eating people. The photos he has provided as proof show a large claw print in the sand that was found among others next to a headless seal that he discovered in 2016. So a large claw print cut into solid stone that was found in 2022, a cave made by something with large claws that has a red fluid-soaked entrance with a red claw print on the cave wall above it, and 3 separate scat samples from a large animal, believed to be one of these creatures, one of which contains very much what looks like a human fingernail. The area these were found in was a couple hundred feet around a lake from the public beach, and there were dozens and dozens of large claw marks coming out of the water and onto shore in various places that didn't belong to any kind of water creature that he could identify. Heck, after staring at them for quite a while myself, and with the knowledge I have of, beings at this point, the only thing in my brain that they look like are velociraptor claws. And I know that's not right. Not unless these photos came from Isla Nublar without telling anyone. Now Taylor has been returning regularly to the beach in question and has gathered multitudes of more evidence each time. He sadly found another decapitated seal and copious amounts of evidence of a large aquatic creature that's coming out of the ocean on a daily basis to feed on seals, ducks, and snow geese. Not only are there large digs and claw prints in the hard ground everywhere, made by a creature with, big claws, but the remains of dead animals are all over the park. Coyotes are the largest predators in the area, and he's never seen one in that park. But the claw prints are way too big to be coyotes or even just a large dog. These digs are much bigger than even bears or cougars, and you don't even see those in the area. Okay, not gonna visit Vancouver anytime soon. I'll stick to the natural predators here in Toronto. Oh, and crappier evidence, in that nearby park, he's collected those 3 separate scat samples that I mentioned earlier, and he's hoping that that human fingernail that he found in one of them is from the missing human that he's been looking for years, so we can stop visiting this area and seeing all this weird stuff. Now, interestingly enough, where he's found evidence of these creatures, it matches up with the locations of people who have gone missing without a trace. Alrighty folks, check up on your BC friends and warn them to not go swimming alone anytime soon, or walk in any parks. Yikes. In 5th place today, we're kicking things off with the Matagami Bigfoot. For those of y'all who are unaware with the area, it's located roughly 6.5 hours north of Toronto, and it's a sweet little community. I personally grew up about 3 hours away from it, so I'm feeling pretty qualified to talk about the area today and provide some additional geographical context where needed. This tale actually begins around 20 years ago when our anonymous narrator purchased property on the lake, which is a very common cottage and vacation spot. He had grown up spending summers in the area and describes himself as very knowledgeable about wildlife noises. Around 9:15 at night, right about when darkness was starting to take over, our narrator and his wife were sitting by the fire, facing the vast woods on their property, when his wife decided to go inside for the evening, probably to avoid mosquito bites. Those are brutal up there. He was staring at the fire alone when he heard what he described as 3 whacks about a kilometer away, and didn't really think about it until around 15 minutes later when he heard the sound again, but closer. Originally he assumed it was the sound of a moose hitting their antlers against a tree, but it was too early in the year for that to be a thing. Being barely able to see the tree line through the darkness, our witness heard the noise again after another 15 minutes. But, you guessed it, closer. Not having anything to arm himself with and only a pen flashlight, he fled into the cottage as the whacks came again, and even closer this time. The whacks were never heard once he was inside the house that night, but happened often at night over the next decade. Now, I know, 2023. The most recent event was just last weekend, when our witness was hosting a get-together to open the cottage for the season. It may seem early, but some northerners are really eager for cottage season, especially since they get such cold up there. All of his neighbors were present when they heard a bone-chilling scream from less than 100 yards from where they were standing, causing everyone to pause in shock and wonder what they were hearing. Soon after, the same type of scream was heard deeper in the forest, almost as if it were answering the first scream. After scouring the internet and listening to a wide variety of animal sounds, nothing matched what our witness heard. His property is water access only, which means the chances of, a random stranger pulling a prank or drunk debauchery are ruled out from possible logical reasoning. My last 2 cents on this point as a former northern girl: I've heard some weird stuff in the woods when I'd be, camping at a provincial park with my family as a kid, but nothing like that. Kinda glad now that I never really went exploring on my own. In 4th place, we have the most recent sighting of Nessie. For the uninitiated, Nessie is the preferred nickname of the Loch Ness Monster, located in Loch Ness, Scotland. Yeah, it might have been obvious to some, but I like to make sure we all know what I'm talking about. Sightings of our girl go all the way back to 565 AD, making her a grown woman at this point in time. Tied with Bigfoot for the most common cryptid being spotted, she's extremely popular, but quite the recluse at the same time. The most recent spotting is the first from this year, and I'm sure there will be plenty more to come. In early March, Nessie enthusiast Eoin O'Fedigan couldn't believe what he saw when he was monitoring a webcam video of the lake from his home. 2 separate clips captured something stirring in the mysterious depths close to shoreline lodges, near Fort Augustus on the loch's southern shore. He described that he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing, and it all happened so fast. In the first video clip, something moves on the surface for a couple of seconds, then you see 2 shadowy wakes moving in 2 lines under the surface, moving to the left around 15 feet before disappearing. Eoin estimated the wake was roughly 6 to 8 feet long, believing the water was too agitated for the disturbance to have been caused by a fish. Now, this is the first confirmed sighting of Nessie in over 7 months, breaking the drought of Nessie news. Maybe she was just hibernating? Can't say I blame her. Look at the weather some days.
Number 3, Medicine Hat. Next, we have a tale from a man who saw Bigfoot as a child without ever being aware what a Sasquatch even was until this encounter. However, this experience with the legendary creature left quite an impression on the man, who can still recall the event in great detail, even all these years later. As he put it, I first started reading about Sasquatches in 1972 after my first encounter. I was born in Calgary, and about once a month we would go to Banff, Kananaskis, or Bragg Creek to go camping. I got used to seeing bats and other wildlife at a young age. On the last weekend of August 1972, we went to Medicine Hat to visit friends. On Saturday the 26th, we went to have a picnic around 10:30 a.m. in Strathcona Park. We started a fire and then went down to the South Saskatchewan River to swim and play in the water. It was sunny and warm with no wind. At about 1 p.m., it was decided that we would make our way down the winding path to our campsite, which was about 150 yards away. Eager to get a hot dog on a stick, I ran ahead of everyone else. About 75 yards down the path, I was jogging when I suddenly smelled a strong odor. I stopped, and it smelled like a freshly washed dog that had rolled around in garbage for a week. I heard a light rustle to the right, and as I turned to look, I saw a large black and red furred back of something facing away from me to the west. I could hear the creak about 30 yards ahead of the creature I was looking at. Its butt was a couple inches off the ground. It was hunched forward at some Saskatoon bushes, and it had a cone-shaped head that seemed to be sitting on its shoulders. It was about 4 feet wide at the shoulders and about 5 feet high. It made no sound or movement, but when I thought to myself, what am I looking at? I was answered by a thought of, you don't see me, I'm not here. I wondered what I was looking at again, and again I got the same response. Suddenly it quietly muttered a chattering sound, and when I heard it, the thought of get out of here now entered my head. Without hesitation, I started running towards the campsite, and as I did, I could hear a heavy thump, thump, thump sound running towards the creek, and the sound of bushes being crunched. When everyone else got back, I asked if they had seen or heard it, which no one had. I was told it must be a bear, but I said it didn't look or act like any bear I ever saw. Then, a friend then said I must have seen a Sasquatch, and everyone laughed. I asked, what is a Sasquatch, as I had never heard or seen the Patterson-Gimlin film. When they told me what it was, I said that it was probably what I saw, and everyone laughed again. I started to read and learn as much as I could about them. I forgot to mention that the Sasquatch was about 30 feet away, with an unobstructed view. Number 2. Pullman sighting. Alberta is one of the best places in Canada to go hunting, if that is an activity that you enjoy. There is a variety of wildlife and strict rules in place to ensure that none of the animals are overhunted. However, you can't get tags to hunt a Sasquatch, which is probably for the best, as this hunter found out and he was making his way up a mountain and came face to face with an animal he wasn't expecting. This is his story. I was hunting 19 kilometers north of Coleman, Alberta. It was late afternoon, early evening. I moved up the mountain, following a game trail through some heavy brush, tracking some elk in the area, and I came upon what I thought was a very large black bear in the brush, about 30 feet ahead of me. It stood up on two legs and turned to look at me when I realized it was not a bear, but a large, heavy-set animal with a black face and no snout, ape-like in appearance. It looked surprised but not scared of me. It backed away from me and disappeared up the slope rapidly and reappeared short about 150 feet up the slope. It looked down at me and called at me with a weird screech that made my hair stand up. It then quickly disappeared up the slope. I tried to go up a little farther, but the slope was very steep and I couldn't figure out how it was able to move up the hill so quickly. Shortly afterwards, a bunch of bighorn sheep came stampeding down the slope from where the thing had gone. They looked terrified, but ran right past me in their haste. I decided to join them and made my way back, looking over my shoulder the whole way. I could have shot it, but I honestly didn't know what it was. I did not return to the area last fall because I am no longer comfortable hunting in that area. I haven't told anyone, but I found one of your posters in Kananaskis, and I thought that I should at least tell you guys about it. I'm an engineer in Calgary, so I do not want my customers to think that I am a kook, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear or someone in a suit. It was a real animal, and I think it was a Sasquatch. Number 1. A log driver's waltz. When driving on the roads, it is important to pay attention so you can avoid objects that are thrown at your vehicle, whether it be garbage, rocks, or even giant logs being thrown at you by a cryptid, as this motorist learned in our next story. Driving north on the existing right-of-way, off to the right and part way up the mountainside was a staging area for logs, pre-cut to length and stacked, awaiting pickup. The beginning of the slope uphill was approximately 100 feet from our truck. The logs were staged about 200 feet up the mountainside. Keeping in mind that as you look up the mountainside, the staged logs become further away from the truck, left of center. These logs weren't overly large in diameter, but I would estimate them at 8 to 12 inches. The vehicle was traveling at roughly 15 kilometers an hour. The weather was slightly overcast with a light mist of rain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a log descending from the staging area to my right and being propelled towards us and the truck, passing through the air in front of us and landing off to the left, only feet from us as we passed by. The log appeared to be launched as opposed to falling off the stack. It would be impossible to fly through the air in the distance it did without some momentum behind it. At this point, I accelerated and removed myself as quickly as possible from the area. Not knowing if this is a hot spot for sightings or not, most likely this just becomes another story without verification. I cannot state that this would be a Sasquatch or Bigfoot incident, but I know of nothing else that could possibly throw a log and project it at my vehicle from that distance. The added elevation could make it possible for the log to travel that distance. I have made mention of this incident to other organizations in the past, but did not follow up with any requests. Today, I am retired to verify the elevations and distance of which I am referring. I should also mention that the log flew through the air like a spear. It did not tumble end over end.
Number 5. Snow wasset. Coming up first on our list of icy cold little critters is the snow wasset, a fearsome, legless little cryptid and a local one to boot, so I had to include it. Anything that comes from the greater Canada area is a big deal for me. It winters by the Great Lakes and the Hudson Bay, and in the rest of the year crawls up to Newfoundland and Labrador. Totally the wrong time of year, buddy. You gotta go to Newfoundland in the winter for Jake's dinner. Anyway, a snow wasset is like a weasel. It's a long, furry creature, except it has no legs. Except in the summertime, where it does have legs and also turns green. If I was a biologist, I would love to get my hands on this thing and figure that out. That particular part of the lore of this creature is really fascinating to me. Why would a creature shed its legs like baby teeth? What cruel joke of evolution is that? It's like a mammal sandworm. Anyway, I gotta move on. When it's in its legless, winterized form, it burrows deep beneath the snow and ambushes its prey by surprise and drags them into the frozen underground. Absolutely horrifying. A frozen, legless, furry little snake is not pleasant by any definition. A wasset is said to be 4 times as large as a wolverine and 40 times as hungry, requiring a vast amount of meat to keep it sustained. Doesn't shed enough calories shedding those legs. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so hung up about this, my ghouls, but I am. Maybe it's because there's not actually that much information about the snow wasset out there. Sightings and stories about it date back mostly hundreds of years, and there haven't been too much buzz about them ever since. Perhaps they're extinct. Or perhaps they've all just burrowed under too deep where I can't see them. Either way, the only thing that really stood out for me is they turn green and have no legs, so I'm gonna keep banging on that. And hey, when it's this cold outside, what do you really need to go out for? Stay inside, order some food, turn the heat up, and keep watching Top 5 Scary for the rest of the night. And while you're there, maybe think about tossing a subscribe your way if it's not too much trouble. Number 4, the Nuckelavee. Coming up next on this list is the Nuckelavee, a cryptid that I had never heard of before researching for this video, so I hope it's new to you too and you get to learn something cool. The Nuckelavee is an old Nordic myth, a demon of the sea appearing as a horrifying demonic, part horse, part man, part thing hybrid. Seriously, this thing is disgusting. It looks like somebody glued a bunch of leftover horse parts and man parts together, and it's completely skinless, leaving its exposed flesh to all the elements to see. Kinda looks like one of those behind the scenes videos of how they make McDonald's chicken nuggets, you know? The Nuckelavee is said to be trapped in the sea during the warmer months of the year, and then come winter is set free to wreak all kinds of havoc. This thing is pure evil, destroys just by breathing. The horsey head part emits toxic fumes just by opening its wretched maw, and this vapor causes crops to wilt, people to fall ill, and drought soon follows after. I see why they keep this thing locked up for most of the year, because it kinda sounds like a royal nuisance. It's thought that the Nuckelavee was first created by old Nordic storytellers as a way of rationalizing and explaining away things like drought and plague destroying the harvest. It's much easier to put a face to your problems, and when that problem is a wretched flayed horseman, it's easy to get angry at that. When stories of the Nuckelavee were told, it was thought to be so evil that its name was always said in a hushed whisper for fears of speaking too loudly of it could attract its attention. Oh, I wish I knew that about 2 minutes ago. I just said its name like 16 times very loudly. It's said that if you're ever to encounter the dread Nuckelavee to find the nearest fresh body of water. This sickly creature of the sea is deathly afraid of fresh water, I guess. You'd think a creature with all that skin exposed wouldn't like salt water or the cold, but hey, there you go, to each their own. You do you, terrifying skinless monster horseman.
In third place, time to talk about fairies. Now, while I like to think of them like helpful beings with multicolored hair and stunning wings, sadly the reality isn't all sugar plums and sweetness. American soldier Sam Barrett is a self-professed family man and comes from a long line of military personnel and is currently deployed on a peacekeeping mission. The location of his story has been changed for safety, so while I'm not quite sure where he's stationed for this, he describes the current climate as always raining or foggy. And at the time of this filming, yeah, ditto. One night this past February, while retrieving a cache of buried weapons, he and his platoon noticed some lights in the forest that were far away, but close enough to be seen with the naked eye. Sam described it as 10 small lights, all moving erratically. Another member of his group began to hear what sounded like two people whispering in a language none of the group could understand. It was very quiet at first, but then it started to gain in frequency until it sounded like they were whispering right next to his ear. Soon, 10 more voices joined in the whispering, but all speaking at the same time. The men began to panic, believing the lights to be a distraction, which was a common tactic used by local enemies, and that they would soon be ambushed. Caleb, a teammate and good friend of Sam's, suddenly started speaking very loudly. It seemed as though he was trying to communicate with his father, who had passed 2 years earlier, and dropped all of his belongings before running towards the lights. Sam assumed that his friend had lost it, or the enemy was playing with their minds. Fearing for Caleb, and worrying he might give up their position, Sam chased after him. Caleb just kept repeating, "I'm coming, father," as he sprinted towards the lights. And as they got closer, the lights got bigger, and Sam found it odd that he couldn't make out any definition in them. There was nobody or nothing behind them, nothing man-made or otherwise. They just looked like lights floating in midair. Caleb was now on his knees with his arms at his sides and directly in front of the lights. He seemed to be in some sort of a trance, and despite Sam's attempts to snap him out of it, he just kept talking to his father and directly to the lights. Eventually, the commander of the team arrived, observing Caleb and then the lights before muttering, "The fairies have him." Oh. Okay, not ominous at all. Caleb eventually passed out and the lights disappeared almost instantly. After being carried back to their base and returning to consciousness, Caleb had zero recollection of what had happened, not only that evening, but the entire day was a blank. Okay, so maybe I don't want to meet a real fairy anymore. In second place, we have a spotting of not deer. Now, I have to say, I was definitely chuckling a bit at first reading about this cryptid friend, seeing as where I'm from, that's just another way to lead into conversation about seeing a moose on the highway. And while the thought of driving within eyesight of a moose is scary enough, not deer, are actually scarier. This report comes from high school student Elias Merritt in Roanoke, Virginia. Describing the time of day as almost dark, he was waiting for his dad to pick him up after a basketball game when he experienced a feeling of something or someone watching him. He turned around suddenly and saw what he described as the shadow of a man behind a bush, which caused him to flee to the other side of the street, hiding in an area where he felt safer but could still see if his ride was arriving. As he stood in this new position, Elias saw 2 deer along the edge of the woods and watched them as they moved, observing that one of the deer seemed to have a bad back leg or was injured. He walked in their direction to get a better look and see if he could help, but as he got closer, he realized they weren't deer and froze, petrified. The beings had oddly shaped heads and appeared to have patches of hair stitched over human skin. Both of the creatures looked into the direction of Elias and slowly stood up on their back legs and began running towards him, chasing him to the point where he was simply running and yelling in the direction of his home, no longer worried about waiting for his ride. Eventually coming across his dad, he jumped in the vehicle and was so panicked that all he could utter was, "Go, go, 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 go," unable to speak normally. Thankfully, his dad didn't prod, and the boy was able to tell his tale to both of his parents once he calmed down at home. Later that evening, Elias's dad sat down with him and explained that several years ago, he had had a similar experience while hunting in the forests outside of town, with his descriptions of the creatures being almost identical to what Elias had seen. Now, not to sound like a broken record, but I'm really glad I've never been the hiking type. Coming in first place, we have the Beast of Bladenboro, over in North Carolina, in the town of, anyone want to guess? You got it. There was a series of animal deaths back in the winter of 1953 to 54 that were highly suspicious, with plenty of skeptics discussing possible predatory animals as the cause, but locals claim it was the fault of a unique predator that still roams the forest to this day and can be spotted anywhere between Bladen Lake State Forest to the Green Swamp Preserve area, which is around 3 counties and 1,225 square miles, making it a fairly sized hunting ground. This spotting in particular takes place in early March, when experienced hunter Zach Kennedy was in the Green Swamp Preserve area when it started getting dark, which is when you have to leave the area in accordance with local law. Making his way through the swamp and bush towards his truck, he heard a strange noise and paused to listen closer, believing it to be a black bear. When he stopped, the unknown being stopped, and when he walked, it also walked. Now, Zach said it made him nervous, no kidding, because whatever it was knew he was there and wouldn't be running off. He said he started making noise and even set off a warning with his personal firearm. Now, unlike an actual bear would, this creature didn't leave, but instead let out a growl. Zach said you could feel as much as hear. A hard pass. When he came out of the woods and onto the dirt road where his pickup was within sight, Zach made the decision to try and run to his truck since whatever it was still following him. The creature soon began running as well, with Zach comparing the sound to a bulldozer crashing through the woods, and when it was out of the woods, it sounded like a horse running through loose dirt. He could hear the stomps of its feet and the growling in its breath, and released another round behind himself, hoping it would scare the being enough to stop for a moment and give Zach a chance to make it to the truck. The creature screamed behind him, and Zach thought the scream came from a human, causing him to turn around and clearly see the creature for the first time. He described it as jet black, as big as a 600-pound black bear, with a tail as long as its body and eyes that were glowing red. Zach bolted the rest of the way to the truck and jumped in, and had barely locked the door before the beast was pressed up against the window, with its breathing fogging up the glass. The creature then moved to the front of the truck, and while standing on all 4 legs, was eye level with Zach and his pickup. It chased Zach as he drove as quickly as he could for quite some time, before eventually stopping and staring as Zach continued his escape. Now, the next day, he and his dad went back and looked around for tracks, red bodily fluids, any evidence at all. He said there was no red fluid to be seen, even though he knows it was, shot, and there were paw prints as big as his hands on the ground everywhere. They then found a tree that had claw marks around an inch deep in the wood and spaced 4 inches apart from each other around 9 feet up. Now, the men didn't venture into the woods, nor did they go too far from the truck, describing the feeling of being hunted and not wanting a repeat of the day before or worse. They got back in the truck to leave and heard a scream that made all of the hair on their body stand straight, deciding then and there to leave and take a hiatus from hunting for this season. Number 5, Bigfoot or the Devil. Our first account for the day comes from scientist Jim Brittle and his cousin and takes place near Johnson City, Tennessee. Granted, every story I'll be recounting today comes from scientists, so I suppose I won't have to state that every time, but I wanted to make sure, that I made it clear from the get-go. So Jim and his cousin were out hunting, as one does, and found themselves sitting on the side of the wall of a rather large hollow, which consisted of very thick underbrush and lots of evergreen trees in a valley that led first to a clearing and then on to a supposed old graveyard. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times, don't mess around near graveyards, but here goes nothing. All of a sudden the duo heard the brush in the hollow below rattling and could tell that whatever was making the sounds was rather large. Jim had a firearm with him for safety, and using the night vision scope, he managed to make out what appeared to be a man at first, but he soon realized that the man was a creature about 7 to 8 feet tall, 450 pounds, covered in thick black fur with long tapered horns pointing straight up from either side of its head. Now, by this point, Jim and his cousin were terrified, so he fired off his weapon repeatedly before retreating into a nearby cabin. The next morning, all the two could find were a bucket load of spent shell casings and holes in a walnut tree. Nearby animal traps had been sprung and all the bait was gone. On a nearby ridge, the men located a series of tunnels made up of brush and various sizes of tree limbs, vines, and leaves, and pondered if it could be the beast's lair, but they didn't feel like tempting fate again to find out. They quickly returned home and never went into that area again, and thank goodness for that. Number 4. Mothman. Time to travel over to Waterville, Maine in late summer of 1971, where even I can't wrap my head around what happened. Dr. Sally Daniels was newly married and living in Killeen, Texas in a small duplex with her husband, who was in the army. One night he was off duty while Sally was home alone in bed, and around 3 a.m. in the morning, otherwise known as witching hour, she woke up and saw a black figure standing at the bottom of her bed. She described it as 8 or 9 feet tall with huge big black wings and red eyes. Now, like any rational person, she tried closing her eyes and going back to sleep, or pretending it wasn't happening, but when she opened them again, the creature had moved to the right side of her bed. Sally was now frozen in fear, unable to scream, and darted under her blankets in a state of panic until the creature left. Shortly after this event, Sally moved to Maine because she was way too frightened to ever stay alone at night when her husband had duty. She had mentioned to her mom about seeing that huge black angel, and the mom was glad Sally came home as that didn't sound good. At the time she had never heard of the Mothman, but a few years later she came across an article and a drawing of one, finally giving her an answer as to what she saw that fateful night.
Number 3. A Chenu. A Chenu is an Algonquin creature of folklore a bit similar to a Wendigo, but with some fun regional twists. While both creatures hunt in wooded northern areas, and are both commonly associated with the wintertime, a Wendigo is usually depicted as a stretched out, emaciated monster, whereas a Chenu is depicted as being massive, very furry, and only getting larger and larger the more it eats. Actually, reading that back now, I realize that's not terribly impressive. Most things get larger and larger as they eat. Much like a Wendigo though, a Chenu is thought to have been formerly a man who was turned into a beast, either through their greedy ways, refusing to feed the starving, or for those who give in to the darkest of temptations and consume human flesh willingly. A Chenu is described as looking like a cross between an old man and a beast, large and imposing in appearance, with big chunks of their own flesh missing, possibly self-inflicted. They cover themselves in the forest, hiding themselves with leaves, bark, snow, pine needles, until they look like a horrible lint roller of the woods that walks upright. Interestingly, unlike a Wendigo, it's thought that the process of turning into a Chenu can actually be reversed. There's some good news. In some folk tales, the way to cure a Chenu is a special medicine that can cause them to vomit up their frozen heart and vomit up the flesh that they've consumed, causing the afflicted to revert back to their human form in a sight that is no doubt disgusting for everybody. But if this isn't possible, if you don't have this medicine on hand, or it's just not feasible to trick a Chenu, you can also get it to eat salt, which will apparently melt it from the inside. Poor Chenu. You're forced to live a tormented existence as a snow monster, isolated from your former friends, doomed to hunt on your former species, consuming only the darkest meat available, and you can't even order a little bit of salt for your dinner, eating a totally flavorless diet. I got nothing but sympathy for you, Chenu. Number 3. Kamataichi. I think it's really fascinating what each culture's cryptids look like, Each culture creates cryptids, and they all put their fun little spins on it, and whenever I get to make these videos, I learn all sorts of really cool mythological stuff that I'd never heard of before, and I sincerely hope you get that out of these videos too. I'd never heard of this next one, the Kamataichi, but I am obsessed with it now. Coming to us from Japan, this yokai, which is like a Japanese type of demon, appears like a weasel except with razor-sharp, sickle-like claws, like a real-life Sneasel from Pokemon. I'm actually amazed there's no Pokemon directly based on a Kamataichi. They seem like perfect for it. They have spiny fur, similar to a hedgehog, like prickly little needles, but they bark like a dog, and their claws could not be any sharper, and they're sickle-shaped. And also, a lot of depictions of them are downright adorable. These funny little creatures are extremely lightweight and have learned how to ride the currents of the wind to travel. They honestly sound kind of like radical in like a California surfer way. The legends of the Kamataichi come out of the Chubu region of Japan, when vicious cold winds were so powerful they would cut people down directly. And these legends would take the form of the spirit called the Kamataichi, which was the winds themselves themselves as this furry little miscreant. It would attack at your legs, causing you to fall down, exposed and helpless, while it sucked at your blood. It's said that no blood occurs from their woundings because of this, as a kamataichi moves so quickly and sucks it all up. That's almost considerate of it, doesn't leave a stain. These creatures move so quickly, and they're so good at hiding, that they're apparently completely invisible to the naked eye, appearing as nothing more than a sharp, freezing wind on your skin. Amusingly, there's some debate as to whether or not a kamataichi's true origin is actually nothing more than a silly pun. There's a stance samurai would use called a kamaitachi, translating loosely to sword stance, which would explain, you know, it's a sharp thing. I don't know where the stance comes in, but it's sharp. However, there are legends all throughout Japan, throughout many regions, all telling stories of creatures that ride the wind and attack humans, and the sickle weasel remains among the most popular and among the most adorable. Sorry, Kamataichi, you are just so cute. If anybody knows where to get like a stuffed toy of this little guy, please comment under the video. I need to know. Number 1, the Yeti. Coming in at the number 1 spot, a mainstay of any trip to the mountain, the Yeti. I mean, who else could possibly take the number 1 spot on a list about winter cryptids? Maybe Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Does he count as a cryptid? I guess he was. Maybe he's more like a mutant. Anyway, a Yeti is an American manufacturer specializing in outdoor products such as ice coolers, vacuum insulated drinkware, and I'm reading the wrong one. Sorry. Let's do that again. A Yeti refers to an ape-like creature thought to live in the mountains in the Himalayas, standing upright like a man and walking on 2 legs, and is usually pretty big, like 8 feet tall, with long arms, broad feet, and long brownish hair and sunken eyes. It kind of sounded a bit like me, to be honest. While it's pretty common to draw a Yeti as just being like a big giant white gorilla, they're actually pretty different, and most traditional depictions of a Yeti color it with darker fur. They're probably one of the oldest cryptids out there that's still talked about so fondly, with stories of Yetis going all the way back to 326 BC, when Alexander the Great sought out to capture one to see for himself while he was conquering the Indus Valley, although he was told that no Yeti could survive at an altitude low enough to meet him, and Alexander wept, for there were no more Yetis left to conquer. It's got several names. It's sometimes called a Sasquatch, or in the West it's popularly referred to as an abominable snowman, although that's a term by British officers who were stationed in the Himalayas, as no natives to the regions call it that. The name Yeti possibly comes from the Tibetan words Yete, meaning a man-like animal, or from Meti, meaning bear in some Nepalese and Tibetan dialects, which would make a good bit of sense, as it's thought that a number of Yeti sightings over the years that led to it being such a widely recognized cryptid could actually just be bear sightings being mistaken in the frosty air. In fact, there's a theory that Yeti sightings are from hybrid polar bears that had bred with grizzly bears, which has been recorded to happen, just not really anywhere where Yeti sightings are really made, so kinda up in the air. In Sherpa tradition, it's said that a Yeti is a powerful, mystical being, and a Yeti can choose to whom it will make itself visible to, choosing to only appear to those who believe in it. So if you're ever trekking the Himalayas and worried about an attack, here's a little advice for you: just don't believe in it. Although there are a good number of people who believe that the Yeti are an intelligent enough species that just want to be left alone to their own devices, living peacefully in the mountains. Not so abominable after all.
Number 5. The Jersey Devil. Since the 19th century, New Jersey citizens have been putting up with a devilish cryptid whose name describes him to a T: the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is described as a kangaroo-like creature with the head of a dog, face of a horse, bat-like wings, horns on its head, and a tail. The Jersey Devil has been terrorizing people for hundreds of years, and there have been a multitude of reported sightings which helped create the creature's reputation. While visiting a mill to inspect his cannonballs being forged, Stephen Decatur launched a cannon at a flying animal overhead. The animal hardly flinched and continued on flying. People often complained of the devil eating their livestock and leaving the animals in ghastly states. One man was actually able to demobilize the creature, thinking it dead, and took a picture. He showed it to dozens of people in the hope that someone would be able to identify the creature with red eyes, and many claimed that it resembled the Jersey Devil. In January of 1909, there was a drastic influx in published sightings. Newspapers wrote of the devil attacking trolley cars and social clubs. The authorities supposedly fired at the creature in an attempt to stop the attacks, but to no avail. Reports of footprints in the snow were coming in from all over the state. Many even offered thousands of dollars for the capture of the Jersey Devil, with the plans to make a private enclosure, or zoo, for the cryptid. Skeptics believe that the Jersey Devil is nothing more than a folk story, saying that the devil was created by the early settlers who were collectively suffering from mass hysteria. Many people have been found faking their claims of sighting the Jersey Devil, and even faking tracks or photographs in an effort to substantiate their claims. Whether the Jersey Devil is real or not, it has definitely become extremely well known and feared as a North American cryptid. Number 4. The skunk ape. The skunk ape is described as a large bipedal creature standing at 5 to 7 feet tall and covered completely in reddish-brown hair. The skunk ape has been reported to live in swamps of Florida. Sightings of the cryptid began in the early to mid-1900s, with the first major sighting occurring when a group of people noticed a large, man-like creature in the Perky Bat Tower. The creature shook the tower, driving the bats away, and it escaped into the woods itself shortly after. In the 70s, 2 Florida deputies reported firing at the creature after it had stalked them through the woods. The deputies followed the uncanny tracks, finding reddish-brown hair that had been snagged in barbed wire. Many Everglades tour guides have reported sightings. In the summer of 1997, David Shealy noticed an animal trap filled with lima beans. David Shealy noticed an animal trap filled with lima beans had large prints on the ground surrounding it. David Shealy soon set up other traps filled with the beans, and many people who explored the swamps reported similar sightings to his. In 2000, the county sheriff's office received a photo of a large, hairy, man-like creature. The person who had sent the photo claimed to be an elderly woman who had seen the creature stealing apples off her porch. She scared it off with her camera, fearing that the creature was an escaped orangutan that might harm her or her family. Sightings are still reported today. 48 out of 67 counties in Florida have made a report since 2010. Those in search for a rational explanation of the creature have accused the entire mystery surrounding the creature as a hoax, saying that the skunk ape is nothing more than a myth and a knockoff Bigfoot. Some say that sightings were just people mistaking other wild animals for it, like sick bears or wolves. Bigfoot's small, swampy cousin has definitely stirred up some serious drama in the South.
Number 3, more Bigfoot. So now we travel over to southeast Oklahoma with a tale from Susan Paulson. It was just another day and she was checking on the animals when the weather radio blared out a tornado warning. So at the time there was a large storm over the area and an advisory was indeed in effect. So while she wasn't surprised, Susan quickly closed up the barn door and hurried towards the house, finding her offspring and husband. They got themselves into a shelter, barred the metal door, and sat waiting for the worst. About 5 minutes after they settled into the dugout, the wind started picking up outside and the whole family could hear thunder and rain outside of the doors. It was soon joined by the impacts of large hail hitting the metal door as the sound of the wind changed to a roar similar to a plane about to take off. They could hear the different sounds of objects hitting the door, but particularly a loud crack and lots of scraping on the door. In total, the entire event lasted maybe 7 minutes, but the family didn't try to leave the dugout until the wind died down, which, it makes sense. Susan's husband unbarred the door and tried opening it, but it would only open about an inch. They could see through the crack that the apple tree next to the dugout had blown over in front of the door. And heck, they tried to pry the door open every which way, slamming their bodies against the door, but nothing worked. The family was completely stuck in the shelter, but they knew at some point there would be people checking on places in the tornado's path, so they stuck a piece of wood in the crack of the door to hold it open and got comfortable and prepared to wait. When 7 p.m. rolled around, they discovered that claustrophobia and panic attacks can strike anyone, no matter how prepared you are. So technically the family was safe and prepared physically for a week, but Susan's not sure their minds could have lasted a week. They could see it was dark through the crack of the door when a foul odor wafted in, smelling like a wet dog combined with a male goat and a teenager's armpits. Now Susan originally thought it was an overly pungent skunk, and she went to shut the door, but stopped when she heard what sounded like footsteps. The family started yelling for help, calling out to whoever was out there, but nobody responded. There was a shuffling sound and the smell got even stronger, causing Susan's eyes to water as she yelled out and pounded on the door. She heard a grunt before the sound of footsteps and the odor started fading away. Eventually the footsteps returned, and while everyone trapped, yelled and pounded on the door, once again there was no response and the footsteps left once more. This time Susan felt uneasy and barred the door shut. Something just wasn't right with this person. At around 3 in the morning, are we sensing a pattern? Susan's daughter woke up from a nightmare and started crying, and Susan was comforting her when she heard branches cracking and scraping against the door along with grunting. She woke her husband up, and once again, they pounded on the door and yelled, this time leaving the door open as much as possible, just to Couple of inches, man. When the noises outside stopped, they waited about 10 minutes to try to open the door, and this time it opened enough for the family to be able to step out. The trunk of the tree was lying near the door, but there was a pile of branches off to the side. And in that ground outside, there were a lot of footprints bigger than any foot Susan had ever seen. After tucking the offspring in their proper beds, Susan headed out to the barn to see if the animals were okay, and was about halfway there when she heard one of their hogs screaming. She ran towards the barn, and a few yards away, she could see her market-ready Hampshire barrow struggling and screaming while slung over the shoulder of a dark, hulking, human-like figure. Susan yelled at the figure to drop her peg, and it just turned and stared. She shined her flashlight at the creature's face, revealing a grayish face with a flat-looking nose. It was covered with thin, dark brown hair all over its body and massive feet. After a few seconds, it turned and walked into the cornfield towards the creek and disappeared from view. Yay for saving everyone, but bummer about losing the livestock. Number 2, a glimmer man in Chicago. So Stella's experience took place on September 2nd of 2022 after a day of running errands for her elderly father, when she had returned to his apartment building and 6th floor residence. She went out onto the balcony for, smoke break, just standing and allowing her mind to go blank when she noticed a weird large tree about 20 feet away. Yeah, I'll elaborate. So one of the branches on the tree was bowing quite heavily, but Stella couldn't see anything on it that could be responsible for the weighing down. As she was staring at the branch and trying to make sense of what her eyes were seeing, an intense feeling of dread and fear came over her, as if every part of her body was screaming at her to turn around and run, but she didn't know why. At this very moment, the bowing branch that she had just been observing began to shake violently, and despite her internal instincts still screaming at Stella to leave, curiosity had now gotten the better of her, and she started to move along the railing to get a closer look. As your friendly narrator, this is where I interject and tell anyone with some sense to run, but hey, what do I know? A small form began to glimmer on the branch, and as Stella continued to watch in shock, a transparent human figure that shimmered a yellowish-white color developed. She snapped out of her fixated stare and quickly took a step back from the railing, realizing finally that this is something that should be feared. Glad the old common sense kicked in after the overwhelming fear, dread, and visual, should have kicked in sooner in my opinion, but that's just my usual snark kicking in. The shimmery being eventually dropped out of the tree, landing behind a man who happened to be walking past at the time. The walking man spun around, his reaction similar to, as if he had been hit with an object from behind, and was confused when all he saw was a cloud of smoke. The shimmering man had disappeared in said puff of smoke almost instantly after hitting the ground. Stella waited for some time, expecting to see this thing re-emerge, but it was completely gone. At the same time, another neighbor just a few floors below Stella and her dad had also observed exactly the same thing as her and managed to confirm all the same details. The neighbor and Stella then managed to track down the man who was walking past a few hours later, and after a conversation, confirmed that he had felt the weird impact, the overwhelming dread, but didn't see anything. Stella is positive that the Glimmer Man still roams the area, often feeling the overwhelming emotions from the day whenever she visits her dad, but hasn't spotted it since. My heart goes out to her, and I hope whatever it is buggers off soon. Number 1, not deer. I gotta say, I was definitely chuckling a bit at first when I was reading about this cryptid, but, seeing as where I'm from, that's just another way to lead into conversation about seeing a moose on the highway. And while the thought of driving within eyesight of a moose is scary enough, not deer are actually scarier. So this report comes from Elias Merritt in Roanoke, Virginia. Describing the time of day as almost dark, he was waiting for a friend to meet him for dinner when he experienced a feeling of something or someone watching him. He turned around suddenly and saw what he described as the shadow of a man behind a bush, which caused him to flee to the other side of the street, hiding in an area where he felt safer but could still see, if his friend was coming. As he stood in this new position, Elias saw 2 deer along the edge of the woods and watched them as they moved, observing that one of the deer seemed to have a bad back leg or was just injured. He walked in their direction to get a better look and see if he could help, but as he got closer, he realized they weren't deer and froze, petrified. The beings had oddly shaped heads and appeared to have patches of hair stitched over human skin. Both of the creatures looked in the direction of Elias and slowly stood up on their back legs and began running towards him, chasing him to the point where he was simply running and yelling in the direction of who knows what, no longer worried about waiting for his friend. He eventually ran into said friend and in a panic told him the entire story. And what do you know? The friend turned pale and explained that several years prior, he had had a similar experience while hunting in the forest outside of town, with his descriptions of the creatures being almost identical to what Elias had seen. Not to sound like a broken record, but I'm really glad I've never been like the nature hiking type.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Mothman. The legend of the Mothman is a really freaking eerie one. So the Mothman originates from West Virginia folklore. Apparently, it's a large 10-foot tall gray creature with red glowing eyes and wings and has the ability to fly over 100 miles per hour, so he's pretty damn fast. This creature has been spotted on a number of occasions. In particular, it's believed that once you see him, bad things are going to happen, so he's kinda like an omen. The first report of this creature was on November 15th, 1966. On this night, two sets of young couples drove out to Lover's Lane to get frisky in their cars. It was Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallet. That's when one of the couples noticed a massive creature with red glowing eyes watching them from afar. The couple, Roger and Linda, freaked out and sped on out of there, but the Mothman followed their car and tried to attack them. Thankfully, they made it out alright, but they were hella spooked and reported their encounter to the police. During the next couple of days, a number of different people reported similar encounters to the police as well. Like 2 volunteer firemen claimed they saw a large bird with red eyes. Then a contractor named Newell Partridge was out in a field at night when he saw the creature in the distance. He shined his light in his eyes and he said they glowed like bicycle reflectors. He then went on to blame this creature for the disappearance of his German Shepherd. So people all around town were hella freaked out. The scariest sighting would have to be in 1967, around the time the Silver Bridge collapsed. Apparently, people who saw the Mothman then went on to receive premonitions of the bridge collapsing and experienced terrible nightmares. And on the day that the bridge actually did collapse, a number of witnesses claimed that they saw the Mothman perched nearby just watching. That's creepy. As long as he doesn't come to Canada though, I'm good. In our 4th spot today we have the red-eyed roadside cryptid. This is the name given to a creature that a man named Britton saw one early morning in Texas. So it was June 20th, 2000 at around 1 a.m. He had just gotten off work and was headed home. Now on the route that he takes, he explained that there's this 90-degree turn and you have to go really slow and be careful because sometimes they find cattle out on the road. So he was making his turn when all of a sudden he saw it. And he knew right away it was not an animal of any sorts. This creature had red eyes and was on 2 feet and had black hair all over its body. So Britton, being the curious man that he was, got out of his truck and shined a flashlight at this creature. That's when the creature raised its arm above its head and let out an ear-piercing scream. It then turned around and ran behind a house. So the man immediately got back in his truck and drove away in disbelief of what he just saw. But according to him, he has heard the scream at night before, but he never knew where it was coming from or who or what was making this noise. After doing research, he found out that this creature he saw is related to the Bigfoot. Sounds like it's Bigfoot's noisy younger cousin. Either way, be careful when driving late at night.
Number 3. The Wendigo. The Wendigo is a humanoid creature, or spirit, originating from First Nations and Indigenous people from the southeastern forests of Canada and the Great Plains of the US. The Wendigo is said to be a malevolent spirit, appearing at times as a creature with human-ish characteristics, capable of possessing humans. The possession invokes feelings of insatiable hunger, greed, and even the desire to consume human flesh. The Wendigo has several descriptions. Depending on the region, it may differ slightly. The Wendigo has been said to have a heart of ice, a foul stench, and a sudden chill when the creature's presence is near. However, in the original Indigenous depictions of the creature, these features were not mentioned. The Wendigo was introduced by Algonquin-speaking Indigenous people, including the Ojibwe, the Saulteaux, the Cree, the Nespaki, and the Innu. In all of their descriptions, the Wendigo is consistently described as a malevolent, flesh-eating, supernatural being, strongly associated with winter, coldness, famine, starvation, and the north. Basil H. Johnson, an Ojibwe scholar, provided a description of the Wendigo. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and unclean and suffering from separation of the flesh. The Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. The Wendigo has also been reported to cause psychosis in humans, usually resulting in the ending of their lives. When near to starvation, the Wendigo will possess a human, which leads the human to act in strange and scary ways. The human will slowly stop seeing those around them as peers, and instead, the possessed may view their peers as food. The lives of people who have been possessed are often ended to ensure that no one gets eaten. The Wendigo has also been viewed as a concept opposed to a physical being, displaying the innate nature of greed, selfishness, and consumption that lays inside us all. In pop culture, the Wendigo has been depicted in many different ways, but all depictions were derived from Indigenous and First Nations people, which has in turn shone a lot of false and over-dramatized information over the Wendigo's origin. Number 2, the Yeti. Yeti, abominable snowman, snowy Bigfoot, all names for the ape-like, snow-dwelling creature that lives in the northern reaches of North America. The Yeti is described as a large bipedal creature with white, gray, or brown hair. It has also been depicted as having large, sharp teeth. The name Abominable Snowman was created in 1921 when Charles Howard Berry led a Mount Everest expedition. He wrote of seeing footprints in the snow. Describing them, he said, he believed they were probably caused by a large, loping gray wolf, which, in the soft snow, formed double tracks rather like those of a barefooted man. His Sherpa guides gave the creature the name of Meto Kongmi, which roughly translates to man-bear snowman. The name Abominable came out of a mistake that interviewer Henry Newman made. In preparation for an interview with Charles Howard Berry, Newman assumed that the word Meto, man-bear, meant filthy, which he substituted abominable for. The name caught on quickly, and many called the creation of it a happy accident. Mentions and sightings of the Yeti extend back to before the 19th century. According to H. Seeger, the Yeti was part of many pre-Buddhist beliefs of Himalayan people. Seeger was told that Himalayan people used to view a glacier being as the god of the hunt. The Yeti has become an extremely popular creature. Filled with many mistakes and misunderstandings, the Yeti has a rich and slightly amusing history. Many movies have been made about Yetis, and people still travel to the northern reaches of the world in an attempt to capture proof of the Yeti's existence. Number 1, the Loveland Frog. And finally, I saved the absolute best for last, the Loveland Frogman. The Loveland Frog, or Loveland Frogman, finds its origin in Ohio. Standing on 2 feet at 4 feet tall, the frog is definitely much larger than the average amphibian. The Loveland Frog was first spotted in 1955. Some stories specifying that it was first spotted in May of 1955, when a businessman spotted the creature while driving on a dark road in Loveland, Ohio. Other stories say that a group of men spotted 2 or 3 creatures, each standing on 2 legs 3 to 4 feet tall, with frog-like faces and leathery skin. Honestly, that description just sounds like me and my friends waking up after a night out. The creatures were spotted over a poorly lit bridge, and one was extending its arm upwards and holding a sparkling light above its head. In March of 1972, in the dark of night, Officer Ray Shockey was shocked as he noticed a large animal scurrying in front of his car. Lit by the headlights, Shockey was able to note the large size of the animal. The creature then walked to the side of the road, stood up on its back legs, and climbed over the guardrail down towards the river. 2 weeks later, another officer, Mark Matthews, reported seeing a large crouching animal on the same road. Matthews secured the animal and brought it to Shockey, showing his coworker that the creature was merely an iguana. The Loveland Frogman has become a less known but very loved cryptid. Renderings of the creature definitely spark a little bit of joy into the viewer of them.
Number 5, Bigfoot. Bigfoot is perhaps the most famous cryptid this side of the Loch Ness Monster. He is found in the forests of North America and is often described as a bipedal, large, muscular, ape-like creature who is covered in dark red, brown, or black hair. Sightings of these incredible creatures have been reported for centuries, with variations of this creature appearing in several indigenous tales and legends, and reports of Spanish explorers claiming to see some circling their camp in the 16th century. Ever since then, sightings of the creature have been a consistent but often unprovable sight, with only ever grainy footage and blurry photographs being presented as evidence. Some people believe that these sightings can be explained as bears that have been mistaken for other creatures, or even escaped apes from zoos who have taken up residence in the forests. Of course, there are also a fair amount of hoax sightings where it turns out to be a man in a costume trying to get attention or sell their fraudulent photos. But is there really a secret species in the forests of North America? With so many sightings that can't be explained, it's hard to not at least keep an open mind.
Next up, we have the Loveland Frog. Hailing from Loveland, Ohio, this massive-sized creature is said to resemble a humanoid humanoid frog, walking on 2 legs and standing at just over 4 feet tall. So I say massive, but I'm talking massive by frog standards here. What's great about this particular cryptid is that there have been multiple spotted at once. The very first sighting happened back in 1955, where a man spotted what he described as 3 short humanoid creatures with frog-like faces under a bridge. One of them also had a bar-like wand device that emitted sparks, leaving a scent of alfalfa and almonds. What an oddly specific smell to describe. There weren't any other reported sightings of this creature for another 17 years, but these 2 sightings happened in a span of just 2 weeks and were both reported by police officers. I always get more interested in cryptid or paranormal accounts when police officers report on it. It's not like it's, Chuck from the hardware store being like, yeah, I saw a frog man. Sure, cops have lied. I think we all know that, but making a report about spotting a frog monster in the middle of the road is, it's an odd thing for a cop to lie about. Anyway, the second sighting happened on March 3rd, 1972, where Officer Ray Shockeye, what a name there, eh? Ray Shockeye, spotted a 4-foot tall humanoid creature with leathery skin and a froggish face, which he saw hop over a guardrail into the Little Miami River. The second sighting happened 2 weeks later, where an officer named Mark Matthews, boring name, spotted what he thought was the same creature before firing at it and missing. This is said to be a false version of the report, with the official one being that he did hit the creature only to discover that it was a large iguana and not a mutated frog monster, but that seems far less likely to me. I smell a cover-up. It needs to be solved. Later on in the month, a local farmer also claimed to have seen the elusive creature, so there you go. So look, I'm a total frog freak. I love the little hoppy guys, and I, for one, much hope that this thing exists, and I think it does. If I ever find myself a trip to Ohio, I'm driving straight to Loveland, where I'm just gonna scour every pond there is with a giant net, and I'm gonna catch them.
In our third spot, we have the Shuck. The Shuck is a ghostly black dog from East England legends. Don't be fooled though, this dog is anything but cute, cuddly, and friendly. It's got a thirst for blood. Those who have seen it describes it as a big black hound. Some even say it has red or green glowing eyes. Now this ghost dog is said to terrorize rural towns and villages across the country. The most famous as well as most horrifying encounter would be from 1577. One night a bunch of villagers had to seek shelter in a church during a huge thunderstorm. As they were huddled in there, a big black dog burst through the church door and attacked a man and his son. It also knocked down one of the church's pillars, so a part of it actually collapsed, and then ran out of the church, and as it did, it apparently left scorch marks on the wood of the church floor and door. Those marks are apparently still there today. People were horrified by this encounter, and that's how the legend of the Shuck came to life. In our second spot, we have the Green Beach Monster. This is apparently a very strong and scaly, slimy beast that hunts for prey in Ohio rivers. The first encounter happened to a woman named Miss Johnson and her friend. It was August 21st of 1955, and the 2 ladies were enjoying a swim in a river. One of the ladies was in an inflatable tube, just, relaxing, while Mrs. Johnson swam by. That's when all of a sudden she was dragged underwater. She struggled to free herself, and thankfully she managed to. She resurfaced only to be dragged under again. Thankfully, Miss Johnson managed to free herself once again. She did so by kicking this thing. According to Miss Johnson, the hand that grabbed her was large and hairy and had sharp nails or claws. She also knew that this beast was large and strong just based on the way it grabbed her and pulled her down and held her down. In fact, Miss Johnson was left with multiple bruises and wounds on her leg from this creature. Without this, people probably would have thought that she was just lying. But she had a full-on claw print bruise on her leg. Obviously, the 2 reported the encounter to the police, and that's when they got a visit from an Air Force colonel. He interviewed them both and took very detailed notes. Before he left, he warned the 2 women to never mention this encounter ever again. And I mean, that sounds hella suspicious. As if the government had captured this cryptid and then it escaped and they didn't want people to know. So anyway, they should get one of those memory erasers from Men in Black. You know what I'm talking about, the little ksh. And in a number 1 spot today we have the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a very famous cryptid said to live in the Pine Barrens region of New Jersey. Legend goes that in 1735 a mother gave birth to a child that she did not want. Her and her husband couldn't afford to raise another child. Apparently she had 12 children already, and after she found out she was pregnant again, she cursed the child and said it was a devil child. In fact, one version of the story, apparently she offered her unborn son to the devil. Anyways, she ended up giving birth to the child and all was well and normal. But as days went by, the kid started to transition into this weird creature. It grew hooves, it had a goat's head and bat wings and a forked tail. It would growl and scream. In another version, the mother was actually apparently a witch and the child's father was the devil himself. And that was the creature that they gave birth to. Either way, it's creepy as hell. So there have been reported sightings of this creature as early as the 1820s. Some say it has a horse's head, long claws, and bat-like wings, whereas others say it looks like a kangaroo with wings. In 1909, that's when this creature terrorized New Jersey. Tons of people were apparently seeing this creature. In fact, due to all the sightings, workers were advised to stay home and schools were closed. Just saying that if they thought that this creature was fake, none of that would have happened, so they were scared for a reason. Eventually, the hype around the Jersey Devil died down. That was until 1927. A taxi driver in Salem City was minding his own business when apparently he encountered this beast. The beast was then following the man and was pounding on the roof of his taxi. Hey, I don't know, maybe he just needed a lift. Then in the 1960s, residents were woken up in the middle of the night to strange screaming. They all knew that this was the cries from the Jersey Devil. And in 1980, the Jersey Devil struck again. Officers and forest rangers were called onto a scene at a farm where a bunch of pigs had been killed. Their bodies were all scratched and ripped open, the back of their heads were eaten, but there was no blood on the ground. There's no explanation for what could have done this to the pigs, besides the legendary Jersey Devil.